Hello, everybody, and welcome to the From Poverty to Progress channel, the channel that is devoted to promoting an awareness and understanding of human progress. My name is Michael Magoon. I am the author of the From Poverty to Progress book series. The first book in this series is called From Poverty to Progress, where I explain the origins and causes of modern human progress. The second book, Promoting Progress, will be available in the spring of 2023, where I build on those ideas to argue for a new policy agenda for keeping progress going. Stay tuned to the end of this video for a free book giveaway. Today I want to talk about why ideologies fail. Anyone who's studied world history has probably noticed there's been a long train of ideologies throughout modern history, and the vast majority of them have failed to one extent or another. In this episode, I want to help to explain why that is the case. For those of you who have not seen my videos, I want to give a quick definition for what I believe an ideology is. I believe that an ideology is a system of thought held by a large group of people that explains what is moral and immoral. And in that ways, it's very much like a religion, but it also adds in the proper role of government and politics within society. Religions typically stay out of the second role. It's important to understand that ideologies have serious constraints on them, which helps to explain why they fail. Human beings cannot create any value system that they want and persuade other people to agree with them, because human beings are not just moral reasoners. We are also biological organisms who need food and energy to survive and sex to reproduce. We are also social animals who must cooperate with others in social organizations. Those social organizations are in competition with other groups of humans for scarce resources. Now, obviously, the most important has been military conflict. There's nonviolent competition between, for example, corporations, religions, nonprofits, and other organizations. So our ideologies are forced to, whether they want to or not, confront material reality. Now, a lot of us like to believe that our own ideologies come from rationality or from science or logic. But that's not true. Ideologies do not come from the rational part of the human brain. Ideologies come primarily from the non-rational part of the human brain, which I call the psychological temperament. We know from adopted twin studies that compare the ideologies and voting preferences of twins who are adopted compared to their biological parents and their adopted parents that about 40 to 60% of our political preferences come from our genes. But parenting, culture, and life experiences also play an important role. Ideologies survive because of the benefits they give to the individual. Ideologies help an individual feel like a moral person. And this is a very important thing for most people. Except for sociopaths, the vast majority of human beings want to believe that they're moral people, and they want to have a system of thought that reinforces that belief. But even more importantly, people want to project an image to others that they're moral people so that they can cooperate in groups with others. So many of the beliefs of ideologies is actually about how it makes people feel and about projecting image. But at the same time, ideologies are not completely non-rational. Ideologies must be plausible to the rational part of our brain. And they must be plausible to our culture and our social network. In other words, our friends and family and co-workers. Nobody wants to believe in a system that everybody else thinks makes them a raving lunatic. At the same time, different ideologies only make sense at a certain level of technology, which is a big reason why ideologies change over time. Ideologies also have great benefits for groups. Human beings are social animals, and we are far more innovative and likely to survive and reproduce in groups. That's why we live in groups. Very few people live alone for their entire lives. In order to be functional, those groups need social norms. Now, we know that there are many, many social norms that are so widespread across societies that they must come from biology. But We also know that there are huge differences between societies that come from our ideas. Religion and ideology play major roles in legitimizing those social norms, and this creates great benefits for the group. Any group with strong social norms has the ability to outcompete other groups. But there's a catch. Ideologies and religions can make groups highly dysfunctional. They often create a hive mind mentality where everyone feels that they have to agree with everybody else in order to get along with the group. So they essentially lie about what they believe, or what psychologists call preference falsification, by pretending to believe what the rest of the group believes just to get along. And this is a very important part of human nature. The result of this is that new ideas tend to get stifled, either because the bullies within the group shut down anyone with new ideas, or because the majority of the people just want to pretend to believe in something in order to get along and not cause waves with the rest of the group. No one is willing to point out the bad results, even if it's obvious to virtually everyone that their ideas are a failure. In the extreme, this can lead to self-destructive behavior by the individual or by the entire group. Ideologies are effectively on autopilot. They identify the long-term goal, and that almost never changes. They identify a list of public policies that need to be implemented, and those rarely change. To the extent that they do, they're usually minor changes. And the means of implementing those policies also rarely change. So once an ideology establishes the goals, the policies, and the means of implementing those goals, those things rarely change over time, despite the results. Ideologies, by their very nature, cannot self-correct. Ideologies have no means for updating their goals, policies, and means to implement those within their own system of thought. And by definition, all other systems of thought are either immoral or not as moral, so they can't borrow from other systems of thought. A goal is either moral or it's not. A policy is either moral or it's not, and the means to achieve the desired goal is either moral or it's not. This makes it really difficult for ideologies to learn over time. Even worse, ideologies have an amazing way of rationalizing failure. Or, more accurately, the people who believe in the ideologies have an amazing way of rationalizing failure. The problem is that if you agree with the viewpoint of a specific ideology and that those things are moral, how can you possibly believe that moral policies will lead to failure? It's just not possible, because you divide the world into what is moral and immoral. So failure is impossible. So what happens? Well, ideologues tend to come up with a lot of excuses for why their policies fail. One of the most popular ones is to talk about the machinations of the evildoers. Those other people who do not believe in our viewpoint have brainwashed the people into not realizing their own interests. Or they claim that, well, the policy wasn't radical enough. Instead of going one step forward, you should have gone 10 steps forward. And if we went 10 steps forward, it would be obvious we would see positive results. Or they would say that the policy was not given enough funding. You only gave it $1 billion when it should have gotten $20 billion. If you increase the funding, you'll get far better results. Or just give it more time. We've only waited 3 years. If we wait 20 years, we'll clearly see the results. Or an unusual event overwhelmed the long-term trend of the positive outcomes of the policy. Every one of these is potentially possible in any circumstance. The problem is the people who believe in ideologies automatically fall back on these excuses regardless of the results. And they do it over and over again. Ideologies, therefore, have a tendency to double down on failure. They cannot accept failure, so they just say we need to try harder and do more. So what this means in the long run is that there are two outcomes of ideologies. Ideologies either lead to total victory or they lead to total collapse. Total victory means typically establishing a totalitarian society where there's only one ideology allowed. And in practice, that doesn't mean everybody agrees with that ideology. It just means a minority is able to bully the majority into pretending to believe in the ideology out of fear. Or the other alternative is total collapse, which Leon Trotsky called the dustbin of history. In other words, they're undermined by their own internal contradictions and they can't withstand interactions with the real world. And in reality, these are not two separate outcomes. Totalitarian societies have almost always led to total collapse for the exact same reason, for the internal contradictions within the ideologies which undermine their ability to interact with the real world. So in the long run, there's really only one outcome: total collapse. Now, some people say that rationality is the answer. Ideologies are based primarily on the non-rational part of the human brain. We must focus on the rational part of the human brain. Now, this is very seductive. I certainly believe in rationality. I think rationality is a good thing, but we have to be careful about assuming that rationality can overcome the negatives of ideology. Very intelligent people tend to believe that they're so smart that they can overcome the non-rational part of their brain and see the world more clearly than others. They tend to believe that their viewpoints are based on science, logic, and reason. What they don't realize is the non-rational part of their brains has tricked them into believing their worldview is based upon rationality, when in fact, it's just a different ideology. So if rationality is not the answer, what are we left with? Are we left with total madness, competing ideologies based on nothing? No, I believe there is an option. In addition to the rational part of the human brain and the non-rational part of the human brain that psychologists talk about, there's something else, something far more important, and that is material reality itself. It is only when we fail to achieve results easily that the rational parts of our brain switches to rational thought. In order to do that, however, we must first recognize failure, which we already showed ideologies are very reluctant to do. I believe what we need to do is embrace small-scale experimentation. A useful system of thought cannot be based on unrestrained morality or on rational thought. It can only come from interacting with material reality and seeing what actually works in the real world. We can see what worked in the past and we can experiment in our present. We must embrace experimenting within reality. Such experimentation requires humility and restraint, which is something that ideologues fundamentally lack. We need to acknowledge that in government policy, we simply don't know what works, so we need to experiment. There is an alternative. We need to focus on results. Treat any ideology or policy preference as a plausible hypothesis, just like in science. It's not a moral necessity. It's a plausible hypothesis that may be right and it may be wrong. And based on past results, probably it's wrong. We need to test policies at small scale in a way that makes results measurable. We need to do more of what works, do less of what does not work, and always be willing to accept that costs may be greater than the benefits. Let me give an example. In the medical field, we have randomized controlled trials where essentially, let's say we're talking about a drug to cure cancer. Rather than have two parties, the pro-drug party and the anti-drug party, battle it out in Congress to see who wins, instead what we do is create a randomized controlled trial where we take a large sample, let's say 1,000 people, and we randomly divide those 1,000 people into two groups of 500. 500 people receive the drug that supposedly cures cancer, and the other 500 receive a placebo or something that looks like a drug but is not actually a drug. Then we look at the results, hopefully over a long period of time, and we will be able to tell how effective that drug is actually at curing cancer. This is the way we should do things in the government. Congress and the state legislators should decide what the goal should be, but they shouldn't decide what the best policy is because quite simply they don't know what works. And we also need to acknowledge that if policies keep failing, you should seriously question the entire goal of the ideology. Maybe it's not possible to, for example, cure cancer. Now, I don't want to give up on that too quickly, of course, but if you see again and again and again that certain policies fail, even though the ideologies say it will work, maybe that ideology is totally wrong. Maybe the goal is unachievable. Maybe there are negative consequences that make it worse for society. These are things that ideologues have great difficulty admitting. I also believe that we need to embrace progress as a goal. Now, for those of you who haven't seen many of my episodes, you may not know what I mean by progress, so I define progress as the sustained improvement in the material standard of living for a large group of people over a long period of time. Now, we know that this progress has been achieved. We know that this progress has delivered great benefits for mankind, and we have evidence for what works. If you want to know more about that, check out my videos of what is progress and what causes progress. We also know that there are profoundly destructive ideologies, ideologies whose teaching conflict with reality because they undermine the necessary preconditions of progress and they cause widespread harm for their society and for the rest of the world, harm in the form of war, genocide, and dictatorship. We also know that there are beneficial ideologies. And by saying beneficial, I don't mean that they're necessarily correct about everything. I am just stating that they are more closely approximate reality because they want to maintain the necessary preconditions of progress and enable society to produce progress. They understand that progress does not come from government. Progress comes from society. But government can potentially undermine progress by undermining the foundations upon which progress is based. And these ideologies want to avoid doing so. In reality, ideologies are in competition with each other. They compete with each other for believers, and they also compete with each other to more closely approximate objective reality. In the short run, the acquisition of believers is the most important, but in the long run, the latter is more important. All ideologies that cannot approximate material reality are destined to collapse as they undermine their own believers. Time plus nonviolent competition leads to the long-term destructions of the ideology. Time plus violent competition, particularly in war, leads to a totalitarian regime or constant war. And we know that in the long run, totalitarian regimes collapse. So in the end, the result is the same. I have one message for ideologues. It does not matter what you believe. It does not matter what you can convince others to believe. Reality always wins. Throughout modern history, you have seen the death of one ideology after another. As Leon Trotsky said in 1917, when he believed he was establishing the final ideology that would create utopia for everyone, go to where you belong for now, into the dustbin of history. And, as Ronald Reagan said in 1982, freedom and democracy will leave Marxism and Leninism on the ash heap of history. I believe that that is the long-term outcome of all ideologies. And the sooner we come up with better alternatives, the better we'll be as a society. Well, I hope you like this video. Please subscribe and like. It really helps this channel grow. Also, I'd appreciate any comments so that I know what it is you like and what it is you dislike about this episode and other episodes on the channel. If you'd like more resources on the topic of progress, I'd recommend going to my website, FromPovertyToProgress.com. With a free email subscription, you get free ebook samples, free audio samples, and discounted prices on ebooks and audiobooks. If you insist on paying full price, you can buy my books in the ebook, paperback, and hardcover format at Amazon and Ingram Spark if you're a bookstore or a library. Audiobooks are available at Amazon, Audible, and iTunes. If you're interested in book summaries on the concepts of technology, history, economic growth, and progress, I would recommend going to my other website, which is techratchet.com. I've got over 280 book summaries there, and many of them I will be covering in future episodes in this channel. So please tell me which one you're most interested in covering. So now we've gotten to the exciting part. It's a free book giveaway. I'm giving away a digital copy of my first book, From Poverty to Progress. Most of you already know the rules. If you don't know the rules, please pause this video and read the instructions. I hope you enjoy this video and that you explore more episodes on this channel. See you next time.